Hello, class. This week we're going over consumer characteristics. Just for an agenda for this video, we're going to start out with a quick review of your upcoming target customer profile paper. Then we'll start to talk about individual customer dynamics. This will cover things like motivation and need and want. And then we'll move into demographics. Demographics spans many different categories, but for today's lecture, we're just focusing on age. We'll focus on other demographics in our next lecture. So your target customer profile paper is going to be due on the 23rd. The rubric and the details are in the week 5 folder. And what you're going to do is you're going to go to a store of your choosing. You're going to spend about an hour in the store observing, looking around, taking note of what you see within the store environment, with the sales folks, with promotions, with lighting, with dressing rooms. You're going to just really soak in and note the store environment. And then you're going to answer the assignment questions specific for 4 paragraphs about things that I'd like to know about the store you visit and the target customer and how the store markets their products to that target audience. You'll take some photos, 3 of different garments and some of interiors of the store. So all the details for what goes into each paragraph is on the outline in Blackboard in the week 5 folder. When you're answering the questions, please make sure to provide an explanation for your thoughts. So when talking about, your store, for example, if your store markets to professional women in their 40s and 50s, I want you to say why you're saying that. And so, you could say, based on the selection of garments, being that they're classic styles, worn in the workplace, for working women. Additionally, the posters and ads, and even the social media feature women of that age group. So I want you to, have some sort of proof, of how that's their target audience, right? So if you do have any questions about that paper, please feel free to email or text me. Moving on to individual consumer dynamics, it's really important in fashion that we understand what motivates consumers to do what they do. Whether we're buyers, visual merchandisers, product developers, we need to kind of understand, why consumers do what they do. And, remember, it's the goal of marketing to help satisfy a consumer's needs. But it's really interesting that the reason a consumer purchases a product can vary widely. 2 consumers can buy the same turtleneck sweater, but one of them bought them because they really liked the styling, and the other bought one because she works in a workplace where it's always very cold, and she wanted it for warmth. So tonight we'll look at the individual and their identity and what motivates them as a consumer. So we'll look at some theories. We'll definitely try to give relevant examples to make those theories a little bit more concrete. So we start off, again, consumer motivation pulls from psychology, sociology, anthropology. So we're going to look at some fundamental reasons why people wear clothes. So different theorists have put together, just that basic reason. Why do people wear clothes? So there's modesty theory, that we wear clothes to cover our private areas. Immodesty theory, that we wear clothes to try to draw other people's eyes to certain parts of our body. So maybe by wearing something tighter or having more skin exposed in a certain area, draws the eyes of others to that part of our body. Protection theory, to protect us from the elements. And adornment theory, that we wear clothes for personal decoration or our expression of our aesthetic. So diving a little bit deeper into adornment theory, some of the goals here are to, thinking about showing off status or boosting one's self-esteem. And this can be achieved through clothing and accessory items or by making modifications to one's body. So for example, in terms of external adornment, you can include things that are suspended from the body, shaped to fit the body, clipped to the body, applied to the body, or held. And for bodily adornment, this can include things like tattoos, piercings, and plastic surgery that change the appearance of the body. Now, we just want to think about motivation in general. Motivation is the process that leads people to behave the way they do. Motivation occurs when there's a need and the consumer wants to satisfy. And once that need is activated, there becomes a state of tension that drives the consumer to try to reduce or eliminate the need. So for example, if you're coming home from class and you're hungry, that could be a need that's activated. And so you're feeling that hunger, that's the state of tension, and that you have to make a decision how to reduce or eliminate that need. Maybe you have a granola bar in your car, or maybe you have you're going to drive by McDonald's, but you start thinking about how you're going to fill that need. Once the goal is obtained, the tension is reduced and the motivation recedes for the time being. Motivation can be described in terms of its strength. So, just how much it's pulling the consumer to make a decision or action, or its direction, the particular way the consumer attempts to reduce that motivational tension. So there have been many theories that explain why people do what they do. One theory is drive theory, that people are motivated to take certain actions in order to reduce that tension caused by unmet need. So for example, if you're thirsty, you're going to want to drink a glass of water. Now, the only problem with drive theory is that these behaviors are not always motivated purely by a physiological need. So, for example, I may just have my water bottle on my desk, and out of habit, I drink from it regularly, whether I'm thirsty or not. Another theory of motivation is expectancy theory. And this is where behavior comes from the expectations that we will achieve a desirable outcome if we act in a certain way or we do a certain action. So, we may also choose one product over another because we expect that that product will have a more positive outcome for us. There's also incentive theory. And this theory states that people are motivated to do things because of external rewards. For example, we might make sure we're following our work dress code so that we can be accepted at our job and then get our paychecks. It's also important to think about the goals of consumers while thinking about their needs. A goal can be positive or negative. So for a positive goal, consumers will seek out what they want and, find products that will help them attain that goal. So an example is if a teenager wants to go to a prom, they'll be very motivated to seek out an appropriate dress. Avoidance, consumers can also be motivated to avoid negative outcomes. So for example, if a consumer wants to avoid rejection, they'll stay away from products that their social circles, their friends, their coworkers disapprove of. Also, in thinking about avoidance, consumers might buy products that help them avoid embarrassing social situations. So for example, Spanx is a company that does a lot of shapewear products and things that help to help consumers slim down with using shapewear. And so by buying a product like that, consumers could be potentially avoiding being judged negatively by their peers. Now, when a consumer goes to satisfy their need, there can sometimes be problems that arise. So there are 3 different problems I'm going to go over with you. The first is approach. The consumer must choose between 2 desirable alternatives. So for example, let's say the consumer wants a athletic wear hoodie, and both Under Armour and Nike have hoodies in the store that the consumer's in, and both are desirable to the consumer. So marketers help solve this problem in a few ways. For example, maybe the Nike sweatshirt is in a newer color, a new season color, and the store is putting on some new Nike items on sale to help increase sales. Also, too, marketers can really highlight the attributes. Maybe the Under Armour sweatshirt has some kind of additional wicking material in it to help with sweat. So that might help the consumer know which product to go with. There's also approach avoidance conflict. And this is where we desire a goal but wish to avoid it at the same time. So for example, this could be maybe I want to buy a fur coat, but I know that fur is bad for animals and not ethically, the most strong ethical decision. Or I may want to eat an ice cream sundae, but I know that that could be high in fat. So those are examples of approach avoidance. Now, marketers have helped out by trying to get customers what they need without feeling that guilt. So that could be, maybe the consumer who wants a fur coat, we'll make some really realistic looking fake fur for them. Or maybe that consumer who wants to eat an ice cream sundae, we'll have, ice creams that are low in calories that'll appeal to them. So that's something too. And, sometimes the guilt can be, the consumer might want a beauty product but doesn't want to spend a lot of money on it. So sometimes even the marketing, like for L'Oreal, for example, because you're worth it, just reminding the consumer that they are worth it. Don't feel guilty about treating yourself. And then there's avoidance types of conflict. And this is when the consumer finds themselves with two undesirable alternatives. So either, for example, they could pay too much for this season's look or go with last season's look, which is currently on sale, or older styles that are on sale. So marketers try to alleviate this pain for consumers with different promotions. Think about like when you get like Kohl's Cash or any kind of store cash as a reward for spending. Or maybe you get a certain percentage off when you use your store charge card so that the consumer can then purchase the newest season's looks, and that becomes the more desirable alternative. So I wanted to have a message board discussion about motivation. And I tried to think what's something that we all have in common in terms of motivation. So I thought about, attending your fashion classes here. So what motivated you to start this degree program or certificate in the first place? What motivates you to come to class week after week? Have there been times where your motivation struggled? What caused that conflict and how did you push through it? So if you want to, you can pause here and go to the message boards now, or you can watch through and answer that after you're done watching the video. So the next thing I want to talk about is needs. And a need is the discrepancy between the consumer's present state and some ideal state. And the distance between those two states can cause tension. The magnitude of this tension determines the urgency that the consumer will feel to reduce it. Marketers try to create products and services that will provide the desired benefits and permit the consumer to reduce the tension caused by the need. So when I think about needs, sometimes I think, what if you had someone who just moved from Florida to New York? And winter comes. They may now need to buy a whole new set of wardrobe because the weather is creating a need, is creating that tension. Well, that's very different than if a consumer moves from New York to Texas and that consumer wants to maybe buy a pair of cowboy boots to fit in with some of the local establishments that she goes to. So you can kind of see, like, when you're thinking about urgency, levels can be different depending on need. And how a consumer can satisfy that need varies, depending on their values and how they were raised. But these personal and cultural factors combine to create a want, which is the manifestation of a need. So when a consumer might want to get a coat, they have options, right? They can go to Walmart and get a $26 coat, or they can go to a high-end store and buy a really expensive coat. And and everything in between, right? So if the need is protection, those are some options that can fulfill that need and that want. There are different types of needs, biogenic needs, the things to maintain our life, and then psychogenic needs, things that we need to help us feel that sense of belonging to our culture, to help us showcase the status we are aspiring to show off our power, our affiliation, things like that. And needs can also be thought of as either utilitarian, being very practical, or hedonic, being more of an emotional response. So psychologists have tried to define a universal inventory of needs. And some personal needs are relevant to consumer behavior. So the need for achievement, this is very much tied to consumer behavior because, a person may buy professional clothes or buy a certain watch or something that shows off that they have achieved a status in life. Need for affiliation. Shopping with others allows us to fulfill that need. Or also maybe we wear a sports jersey out in public to show our affiliation with a part of the United States or with a certain team. Need for power. Clothing can play a role in that because there are definitely styles of dress that showcase power. Need for uniqueness. Using clothing to really show off one's true personality. Now, you may have had other classes before in the past where you've looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But basically what this is it shows our most basic needs and then goes upwards towards self-actualization, one of our highest, senses of being fulfilled. Now, this concept may only apply to Western cultures. People who belong to other cultures may question this theory. And some examples of why that is because cultures that value the welfare of the group over the individual may have a different type of value system. Or there are religious leaders who take certain vows. So while they may not have friendships, maybe they've taken a vow of silence, that does not mean that they couldn't reach self-actualization. Because the way this theory stands is that if you don't have the things at the bottom of the pyramid, you can't reach the top. So, it's really hard to make good friends and have strong relationships if a person is super worried about, their sense of security or where they're going to get their next meal from. So, these basic needs, in theory, need to be filled before one can move up the pyramid. There are ways in which clothing can be tied to this hierarchy of needs. Starting at the bottom, clothing protects from the elements, covering basic needs. We also hope that clothing that we buy in the U.S. has been tested and has certain standards where it will not harm you. In terms of psychological needs, fashion is something that we can share with others. Wearing the latest fashions can make us feel good about our self-esteem. And then for self-actualization, our clothing can be an expression of our total selves. Now, when marketers are thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of need too, they might be marketing certain products that fit at different levels of this pyramid. So sometimes for our most basic needs, medicine, food, basic clothing items, safety needs, sunglasses, mace, sunscreen, fashion and grooming products being things that are related to our belongingness and love. Esteem needs could be cars, clothing, credit cards, and self-actualization could include hobbies, travel, and education. So it's kind of shown that through market research that engaging your consumer is a really strong way to build that relationship long term with the consumer. And any retailer, any business wants to build that relationship. And involvement can be viewed as the motivation to process information about the brand, to pay attention to the product information. We're bombarded with so many ads in any given day that we really choose to see which ones we pay attention to and which ones we ignore. So, for example, a couple months ago, I was browsing social media, and I saw something about Target's anniversary collection, and I wanted to know more. I started Googling the release dates and finding information about the designers and really diving deep into that information, so that when it came out, I was all ready to be there on the day the store opened, and engaged with a brand that I love, and I really enjoy when Target does their collaborative collections. So levels of involvement can vary, and the type of information processing that will occur depends on the customer's level of involvement. So this could be simple processing, where just the most basic message is considered. So, okay, yeah, I saw an Amazon ad yesterday. Oh, yeah. To elaborate, where I am linking, information I know about the brand to information I know in my mind. Like, oh yeah, Amazon. Oh, they have that, locker downtown where I can pick it up if it's delivered there. It becomes a much more complex thought about the ad I saw or the brand I saw. Involvement can be thought of on a continuum, where lack of interest in marketing is on one end and brand obsession is on the other. And then that engagement and involvement can be anywhere in between those two. And different market research articles, find ways to measure consumer fashion involvement. So we have these different types of involvement. Product involvement. So this could be level of interest in a specific product. And a big example of that is those who are interested when an Apple product comes out, when Apple makes something new. Or when there's mass customization and custom products are sold at mass market prices, is a way that we see fashion, taking interest of certain target demographics and niche groups and customizing things, but at mass market prices. Message response involvement. This is where the consumer's interest in processing marketing is high. So, this is where, if you've ever, heard a commercial where it's like, text this number with the code SAVE to get a 10% discount. Or, for example, fans being part of the advertising. There was recently the Best of Geico ad, and it featured a customer who won a drawing. But, it's making the customer's interest as part of the process. And then purchase situation involvement. Differences may occur when buying the same item in different contexts. So, for example, if you, when you want to impress someone and you buy them a good brand, or maybe if you have to buy a gift for someone who you don't need to impress as much, maybe a family member who you don't, see as much, you don't care about what they think. But if you were buying a gift for someone whose thoughts were important to you, you would give a lot of time and energy to that purchase item. Here are some strategies that market researchers recommend for increasing consumer involvement. By no means is this a complete list, but this is just some things to think about. Appeal to the consumer's hedonic needs, need for excitement or need for love. Prioritize social media customer engagement. That's where consumers are, and that can really be influential in them sharing within their social groups information about your brand. Incorporating authentic storytelling, something that is very popular. Segment your branding efforts to target specific audiences. So, for example, if you have a niche audience, for example, plus size clients, making sure that your branding reaches that audience. It's been very popular to use influencer or celebrity endorsements to help increase customer involvement, especially if that customer really relates to that celebrity or that influencer. Building a bond with your consumer through loyalty programs, special events, early sales, different things that make them feel special. And then prioritize products to customer habits and prior purchases. So I love when Amazon suggests things to me because usually they are things that I am interested in. Okay, so the next message board for this week is your brand involvement. I'd love to hear how you are personally involved or engaged with brands. So, which fashion brands are you extremely loyal to or brand? Why do you have a connection to that brand? Do you engage with that brand on social media? What is that experience like for you? Are you active? Are you passive? Is it enjoyable? Anything else? How does that brand align with what you value? How does that brand match up to who you see yourself as a person? Thinking about your identity. Does that brand match up to who you are? So you can pause here and go fill out that portion of the message boards, or do so after finish watching. Moving on to values when we're thinking about consumers. Values are one's, core beliefs that motivate our behavior and our decision making. Values play an important part in buying because a lot of the times, products and services are purchased because people believe they will help us, reach a goal. And those goals are usually very much related to our values. Research that goes all the way back to 1930 shows that a person's general values do affect their specific clothing decisions. And as discussed in past classes, different cultures and subcultures can have their own values. So really interesting, an example of this is Cosmo. In the US, the magazine is very known for being very sex positive and talking a lot about, different issues related to a modern woman's life. However, in China, there is no mentions of sex at all in Chinese Cosmo, and also in Sweden. But those are for different reasons. Because China is a very reserved, country that does not even allow the mention of sex in publications. But in Sweden, it's not mentioned in Cosmo because it's not seen as controversial or even adds any sizzle. Like, it's not going to sell a magazine because it has that word on the cover, because it's, they're such an open country. So it's kind of interesting that, values that consumers have, being in different parts of the world or different cultures, can relate to how consumer goods are produced. So, one of the things that I wanted to show were some values that are related to clothing. So, kind of made this chart here from a Clothing and Textile Research Journal article that here are some different values that we can look at and how they are emphasized in clothing. So theoretical, this is where we're looking at maybe the purely objective properties of the fabric. It's a cellulosic fabric. It's made out of, renewable resources, things like that. There's the economical value where, a consumer is maybe more thrifty, or they're looking at reducing waste. The aesthetic, if it looks good, nothing else matters, is sort of how that value is espoused in clothing. If the value is social, the person is conscientious. They are really disturbed by some of the injustices that happen in the fashion production pipeline. If the value is political, this is going to require, clothing that will earn respect of others. And if their value is religious, they're going to follow simplicity as an ideal. They don't want to be flashy or call too much attention to themselves. They want to be more modest. So just kind of thinking about how our values can relate to clothing. We can also use values to explain consumer behavior. And so it's kind of cool that there are these market research companies who do these nationwide surveys that ask consumers, about their shopping habits, about their movie-going habits, about their, insert behavior here, right? And they sort of look at that to start to put consumers into clusters and break them into smaller groups based off of their behavior patterns. So this is an activity. You don't have to show me your results or anything, but if you want to take one of these surveys, these nationwide surveys, to see what kind of consumer group you are in, I think it's about 40 questions. It's not too long at all. I had to take it to put the screenshot in here, and I remember it took me not a lot of time. So this is kind of fun because it shows you your primary group. So my primary group is I'm in the innovators consumer group, and then my secondary type is the experiencers. So when you get your results, you can click on the circles to see what each of those innovator, experiencer, what all of those mean. So I do encourage you to take the VAL survey. It's kind of fun, but don't have to do it. So most American consumers experience insecurities about their appearance. In 2018, there was a research study that found, percentages of Americans who were dissatisfied with how their body looked, 83% of women in that study and 74% of men. 86% of younger adults, 18 to 34, and 75% of those who were 55 plus. So you can see, there are just these huge amounts of numbers of people who are unsatisfied with their appearance. And again, looking at the 82% of those with a college degree versus 75% of those without a college degree, those numbers aren't that huge depending on their sample size, but, just kind of interesting. And at least 1 in 3 would give up alcohol, pizza, and or social media if it meant they could achieve their perfect body overnight. So thinking about self and identity and clothing. Clothing can be so huge in expressing one's identity. And here's a nice little quote, one's identity is established when others place them as a social object by assigning them the same word of identity that they appropriate for themselves. It is a coincidence of placement and announcements that identity becomes a meaning of self. And so we're really looking at how truly our identities are shown through our clothing. And clothing can validate and establish identity too. So clothing is very much tied to identity and self. Self-concept. This refers to a person's beliefs about their physical attributes and how they evaluate those qualities. One's overall self-concept might be positive, but there might be parts of their self that they evaluate more positively than others. There are some different components of self-concept. There's the self as structure, and this is the thought process that organizes the qualities of self. So clothing can be thought of as like me or not like me. If a friend holds up a shirt when you're shopping, you're either thinking, yes, that's like me, or oh no, put that back on the rack. Self is process. So this is the development of self through social interactions. Other responses to our appearance, clothes, affect feelings about self. And this is something that you will continually examine and refine throughout one's life cycle. And self-perception. Our own thoughts about our behaviors as well as feedback from others. So, we might choose clothes for how we want to appear to others and how we see ourselves in the world. Also, there is social comparison. So this is where we compare ourselves with others in society. And clothing is so visible that it makes comparison almost natural, right? We're like, oh, they shop at the same place we do. Or, oh, I saw that outfit in Target last week. Oh, cool. Right? We just visually make comparisons. Self-definition. Statements about self. This can be thought of as goals or roles where the individual uses symbols to build and retain these parts. So this could be finding clothing items to fill an identified void in our lives. Maybe we wanted to wear more bright colors, so we were seeking that out, right? Self-esteem, feelings of self-worth, positivity or negativity of self. And so sometimes this is so tough because it doesn't correspond with reality. Someone might see themselves as not very beautiful, but really they are. So that's just something to think about with self-esteem. People with low self-esteem do not expect that they will perform well and will try at all costs to avoid embarrassment, failure, or rejection. People with high self-esteem really expect to be successful and take more risks and are willing to be the center of attention. So fashion can play a huge role in this. Whether people want to feel good, they might take a great deal of attention in their appearance because they want to look good for an occasion. Or on the other hand, people with low self-esteem, they may ignore their appearance or overcompensate by obsessing over their appearance. So this is sort of how clothing can relate to self-esteem. Much of the research on self-concept shows a relationship between self-concept and appearance. Wow, I can't talk today. Sorry. But we don't have a good understanding on which is the cause and which is the effect. So, just kind of an interesting part of the research on self-concept. Some advertisements will show, really attractive, happy people using their products so that people can sort of make that comparison that people who use that product are happy and attractive. There's sort of that mindset that it creates. And studies show that young women will often compare themselves to models in print and TV ads. And so, I think a lot of companies have been doing a great job with making movements towards not photoshopping their models and trying to show off real women in ads because the studies do show some of the comparisons and some of the harmful effects. So when thinking about a consumer, again, and their identity, there is the ideal self. And that's the conception of how we would like to be, while the actual self refers to our more realistic appearance and the qualities we have or don't. The ideal self is molded by consumer culture, so role models, celebrities, people we see in ads, who serve as the models of achievement in appearance. We may purchase products that help us achieve those goals. Again, makeup or shapewear that makes us more like the ideal self. And when we cannot attain the ideal self, we engage in coping strategies and compromises. So it was really interesting. I was reading an article in New York Times a couple of weeks ago about a woman who had heard about more and more people going to try to get plastic surgery to appear in Instagram face, how Instagram smooths out your face and makes it more round, and people wanted she was doing her whole research today about how people go to plastic surgeons to achieve that. So it's kind of interesting to be aware of consumer trends and different things that are happening in relation to ideal self and actual self. There's also the consumer's private self versus the public self. The public self is concerned with how others see us. That could be our social expectations of our age group, our gender, our occupation. What constitutes being socially acceptable within public. Where the private self involves more reflection in our head, and this might be where we do a dress rehearsal for public presentation, or it could be where we dress for fun while expressing ourselves. But there is sometimes a difference between the public self and the private self. And if you just kind of think about on a day where you don't have to go out, how that self might be very different than a day where you have to go to work or to school. So One of the things about, living in this very modern society is that oftentimes we have many different identities and many different roles that we serve in our life. And so concept of self can be thought about having these different roles. And some are simultaneous and some might be at a different time. But there are some identities such as, parent, spouse, student, boss that are more central to ourself than others. Ballet dancer, advocate, comic book collector, and maybe more dominant in different situations. So just kind of thinking about that, different versions of ourselves where we might have to dress differently depending on the role we're playing at that given time. There is also some things to think about with multiple selves is symbolic interactionism, and that's relationships with other people play a large role in forming ourself. So each of us interprets our identity, and this is an assessment that continually is evolving. Consumers may buy products based on who others think they are. So, it can be maybe all of your friends think you're the smartest person in your group, and maybe you are, which is awesome. But maybe you start buying products that you just associate that intelligent people would buy. Like, that, I know it's a kind of silly example, but maybe you're like, oh, I'm going to buy the New Yorker magazine because my friends all think I'm the smart person in the group. I don't know. But there are other examples that I just am not thinking of at this very moment where people will start to make purchases based on how others see themselves. There's also the looking glass self, and this is the process of imagining the reaction of others towards us. And this image will differ depending on whose views we are considering. Like you could look at yourself in an outfit that you're going to wear going out on a date. And maybe you're like, oh my gosh, my date is going to love this outfit. It is amazing. But maybe your parents wouldn't love the outfit. I don't know. So, that's something that you think about as you sort of reflect the reactions of others when looking at yourself or thinking about your dress. Self-consciousness. These are, self-conscious emotions are those affected by how we see ourselves and how we think others perceive us. They might include emotions such as pride, jealousy, and embarrassment. Some consumers are more conscious of their image than others. And consumers with high levels of self-consciousness may spend more money on products and fashions that help create the desirable image within their social group. Self-product congruence. This is, just how congruent is your image to the products that you're buying, right? Thinking about that. Because many consumption activities are related to self-definition, it's not surprising to learn that consumers demonstrate consistency between their values and the things they buy. Self-image congruence theories suggest that we choose products with an attribute that matches more of our sense of self. So I don't know if you remember those commercials from a long time ago where the younger, I think it was Justin Long, I can't remember if that's who he was, the younger actor was like, I'm a Mac, and the older actor from a different generation was like, and I'm a PC. And so, for younger people, they could feel more of a sense of belonging to the Apple brand because, of the way that Apple marketed that product. So in these cases, the ideal self seems to be a relevant comparison standard, but the actual self is more helpful in everyday functional products. Oh yeah. So that's something to think about too. If you're just trying to buy a basic, your actual self versus your ideal self, it's actually just going to be more functional to just buy a cheap basic item than maybe you really want a designer label basic black t-shirt. It's probably going to be more functional, more relevant to buy the standard basic. the extended self. So this is where there are props and settings consumers use to define their social roles as part of their sense of who they are. Some people cherish products so much they consider them a part of themselves. If you think about Carrie Bradshaw from Sex and the City and her Manolos, I feel like that's a really good example of someone who considers a product to be so much a part of who they are, their personal brand. Many material objects can help a consumer identity. Those objects could be, objects that they own, objects that their family owns, objects that their community owns, and even objects from social groups. So, an example of like objects that a community owns, like maybe there is a park in a neighborhood that is well known for the murals that are on the wall. Well, that's like an object, but if you live in that community and you walk by those murals every day, like that may form a part of your sense of self. Like, I live in this great neighborhood with murals. It's really nice and artistic and creative. So that's kind of an example of how an object can become part of one's identity. So even though gender roles change over time, society really continues to communicate assumptions about what is expected for men and what is expected for women. And that's often still assuming gender is on a binary. Some products are considered more feminine, others considered more masculine. And then androgyny refers to the process of, apparel or items that have both masculine and feminine traits, include both. Body image. This is a person's physical appearance, in large part of their self-concept and self-esteem. This is really that their subjective evaluation of their self. And it's not always necessarily accurate. So it's a common marketing strategy to sort of prey on the insecurities and about appearance that some people will have, and how those insecurities may hinder them from reaching their goals. So I think about an ad recently that was kind of brought into scrutiny for this, was the Peloton wife getting the Peloton as a gift ad. I think a lot of people saw that as that was a gift that, was preying on a very thin woman's potential insecurities about weight loss. Now, I know not everybody feels that way, and I am very pro Peloton. The gym that I belong to has a few of them in there, and I like to use them. But that's an example of like, some people saw that as marketers taking an already very thin woman and getting a gift of a bike as a symbol that maybe she needed to lose some weight. So, again, you may disagree, you may agree. Either is totally fine, but it's just kind of a marketing strategy that you can see. Many consumers use their clothing to help de-emphasize parts of their body that they are unhappy with, and that can be, again, using shapewear or using certain styling techniques. Like, I really love wearing A-line skirts to, they just really flatter a lot of people's bodies. There's definitely things that you can do to use clothing to de-emphasize any part of your body that you might want to. And another thing culturally that plays a part in sense of self is ideals of beauty. And so, these are sort of physical appearance traits that are deemed very desirable. And so oftentimes American beauty standards include like really large eyes, tiny waist, large chest. Magazines and runways can reinforce these images. And a lot of times too, folks from diverse backgrounds have been ignored. And there's been a lot of use of white celebrities, actors, and models in advertisements, and not enough multicultural, actors, models being used in ads. So hopefully we've seen that been changing, but hopefully that will continue to change, and we will have more diversity within the American ideals of beauty. Changes to the body, I've kind of already talked about some of these, but cosmetics, plastic surgery, tanning, some people will say that using diet food, diet drinks, body decoration, body modification, some of the negative consequences that we see from emphasis on the ideals of beauty could be fat shaming, heightism, body image distortions, and eating disorders. So it's just good to be aware of some of the negative consequences from ideals of beauty and beauty expectations in our society. So I'm switching gears from the theoretical to our topic of demographics. So we are going to look at age tonight, and we're going to look at age through these different generation groups. Gen Z being our most recent generation group, Gen Y, Gen X, and the baby boomers. So these ages of when the age group was born, they range. I have another fashion textbook that I use that says that Gen Z was born after 1996. This says born after 1995. So, there definitely are slight variations on when folks from different generations were born. But this is just sort of a guideline, right? So it gives you a concept of what the time was. You'll notice these are around, 15, 20-year periods. And when we think about these different generations, a lot of the times they experienced similar things in their life, like major news that happened. For example, like the baby boomers experienced the Vietnam War. Gen X, they experienced the Cold War. Gen Y, 9/11, and living through that and as they were coming to adulthood. And Gen Z is our generation, of focus now. So I am not focusing on as much the generation born between 1925 and 1945. It's just in terms of consumers, I still want you to have that information at your fingertips, but really what many consumer marketing groups are looking at now is baby boomers through Gen Z. And so we can see some of the influences in their lives. The baby boomers were there for the civil rights, sexual revolution, Vietnam War, divorce rates being high. They expected the American dream. They were around when portable radios and color TVs came out. And then 3 defining traits. Again, this is just on average, this is not every single person who was born in those years, but they tend to be more team-oriented, they tend to be able to stay calm in a crisis, and they tend to have a strong work ethic. Generation X, they experienced Watergate. A lot of their parents were laid off from work during economic tough times. And they often were, the term is latchkey. It means when they came home from school, they let themselves into their house and they kind of watched themselves and their siblings because both their parents worked. So there was that time from, when they got out of school till when their parents came home that they were by themselves. Technology, such as game consoles and entertainment from like Sesame Street was big when Generation X was growing up. They tend to be informal, self-reliant, and self-focused. In other research that I've seen, Generation X tends to be very good at researching products that they want to purchase. Millennials, these folks experienced economic recession, boom, then bust. Often were their parents were divorced. The media that they saw come through in their lifetime, MTV, CNN, the internet. 3 defining traits. They're mostly confident. They tend to be competitive and self-focused. And next is Generation Z. They have lived through 9/11, the war on terror. In fact, I think the U.S. has always been at war for their whole lifetime. Globalism, this group tends to be more multiracial. This is also, children who are growing up with same-sex parents because of more acceptance in the United States and legalization of same-sex marriage. So, those are some influences for Gen Z. Media that they've been exposed to: PCs, smartphones, web, social media, Netflix, GPS. And then they tend to be very accepting of differences. They tend to be entrepreneurial, and they tend to be very tech savvy. And so, how you look at the different generations and what you look at specifically can vary. This marketing group looked at how they communicate, showing the baby boomer preferring the telephone, Gen X preferring email and text, millennials preferring text and social media, and Gen Z preferring their handheld mobile. And also looking at attitudes towards their careers, which I think is really interesting, especially for Gen Z, because as we move towards a more gig-based economy and people having multiple types of jobs to support them, it's kind of interesting to see Gen Z focusing on multitasking and pop-up businesses and things like that. So just kind of fun to look at how marketers examine these age groups. Also, in terms of age, we want to think about teenagers because, on average, they spend about $2,600 on food and clothes. And, that's got some spending power. That's 42 million teens in America spending money on a variety of products. Recent study kind of looked at some of their top brands, and you can see Nike, Amazon, Michael Kors, Ulta, Nike. We see what the younger teens are paying attention to. Now, also thinking about the teenage consumer, you also want to think about some of the things that they experience in their life, because this can help you with marketing or creating products that help them with some of their common conflicts. So teens often, they want their independence, but they still need to have the support from their family because of their age. They want to rebel against what society has put as norms, but they also want to be accepted and feel as part of a group. Teens also are trying to learn how to reconcile how the world should be with what the world really is. And then lastly, teens are obsessed with their appearance, but also value sincere relationships. So how do they work through that sort of tension there? So just kind of knowing these helps you think about the teen market. Next, the college market. And so the National Retail Federation showed that college students plan to spend, $942 on clothing. So they spend the most on electronics. But besides electronics, here's where they spend: clothing, furniture, food, shoes, personal care items, supplies, gift cards, and clothing with their college name on it. So, this is just really helpful to know and to think about, if the college student is going to spend $942 related to their college activities, how does that get broken down? What does that look like? And, how could this information be useful to you as a product developer, buyer, or merchandiser? The most popular shopping environments. It's not surprising that online is the most popular, and college bookstores ranking at the bottom of that list. Looking at the spending habits of millennials, there are currently 83 million millennials in the U.S. They're more likely to make impulse purchases and use subscription services. They are likely to consider social responsibility. And when shopping, they focus on discounts, value over a brand's reputation. Tend to. Gen X spending, according to the Pew Research Center, Gen X, they currently make up 20.6 of the U.S. population, which makes them smaller. They're very pragmatic. They're driven by information. Most focus on research before making purchases, and they value product performance. Brands should really aim to provide Gen X shoppers with straightforward products and pricing information, and also reward loyalty through targeted email promotions if they want to reach this group. Baby boomers, there are 73.4 million baby boomers in the U.S., and many are already in their retirement years. Consumers age 60 plus will continue to drive U.S. spending for the next 5 to 10 years. They hold $2.6 trillion in buying power and credited as one of the wealthiest generations to date. So that's something to keep in mind, especially because this generation feels now that they used to be who everybody was marketing to, but now as marketers are trying to court Gen Z and the millennials, the baby boomers are feeling left out. And so there's a huge opportunity to create products and fashion items for this generation. Yes, I skipped ahead on my thoughts. But yes, not enough designers are catering to these older adults, and many still have an interest in fashion, but they do struggle finding clothing that fits perfect. All right, so thank you for bearing with me. A lot of theory today. We're just trying to learn about some of these consumer motivation theories. But some key takeaways from this week's lecture. Marketers try to satisfy consumer needs with a variety of reasons, and there's a variety of reasons that any product is purchased. Traditional approaches to consumer behavior focus on ability to satisfy consumer needs. Consumer motivations are often driven by underlining values. Products take on meaning because they are seen to help consumers reach their goals. Consumer self-concepts are reflections of their attitudes towards themselves. Clothing and fashion are used by some to express their positive self-esteem and by others to overcome feelings of inferiority. Many product choices are dictated by the consumer's perceived similarity between their personality and the attributes of the product. Consumers share life experiences with others in their generational group. This can impact the spending habits overall of the group and how to market products to the group. So next week, we will finish demographics and psychographics and start talking about fashion decision making. All right, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for watching.